sound of a low ambient hum, like wind through ancient trees, begins and fades slightly into the background. It wasn't the click of the biohazard containment lock that broke me. It was the silence that followed. The complete, total, unanimous silence from the other side of the reinforced glass. Julian Croft, my mentor, my supposed friend, stood there, his face a perfect mask of regret, holding the contaminated petri dish he'd planted in my incubator. He'd just finished telling the board I was reckless, a danger to everyone, a scientific pariah, and in that moment, seeing my entire life's work curdle into a lie, I felt a cold snap in my own mind, a fracture. It was the sound of my future being buried alive. That's the memory that started it all, the one they couldn't take from me. My family, of course, called it a breakdown, a disgrace. Mycology? My father had always sneered even when I was at the top of my field. A glorified gardener. After the blacklisting, it got worse. I retreated to a dilapidated cabin my grandfather had left me, nestled deep in the Olympic rainforest, a place perpetually damp, dark, and fecund. The perfect place to disappear. The perfect place for things to grow. "You're chasing ghosts in mushrooms, Eris," my brother Mark told me on my last visit home, his voice dripping with pity. "You're losing your mind out there. Everyone's worried you're going to hurt yourself." My mother just wept, begging me to come back, to get help, to stop this obsession. They saw a broken man retreating into a fantasy world to cope with professional ruin. They couldn't understand that I wasn't running from something. I was running toward it. I had a theory, one I'd only ever dared to whisper in the corners of my research notes, that certain fungal networks under specific environmental pressures could develop a form of primitive consciousness, a psychic network. A hive mind that didn't just decompose matter, but absorbed the lingering psychic residue of the life that had died there. I called it parapsychomycology. Julian called it career suicide. My family called it insanity. In that forest, I found it. It started with a strange, pale, bioluminescent mold I'd never seen before, fanning out from the rotted heartwood of a fallen hemlock. It pulsed with a soft, milky light, almost like a slow heartbeat. When I touched it, my gloves sizzling slightly from a faint bioelectric charge, a jolt went through me. But it wasn't pain. It was a memory, not mine. I saw a flash of antlers against a gray sky. I felt the panic of a stag, the searing pain of a cougar's claws, and then a quiet, spreading cold as its life was absorbed into the forest floor, into the network. They said I was losing my mind, but my mind had never been clearer. I spent months, then years, cultivating it. I learned its language, not of words, but of raw, unfiltered emotion and sensory data. The ridicule from the outside world faded into a dull hum. Old colleagues would email me articles mocking the delusional Dr. Thorne and his ghost fungus. I didn't care. I was communicating with something older than humanity, something that remembered everything that had ever lived and died in that forest. But the line began to blur. I let it into my mind, and it, in turn, let me into its vast, silent consciousness. I became its observer, and it became part of me. There were nights I'd wake up, my body still, and my consciousness would be stretched out for miles, feeling the cool night air on 1,000 different mushroom caps, tasting the decay of a fallen sparrow a mile away, feeling the slow, silent thoughts of the trees. The horror of it was profound, the terror of losing my own identity, of being dissolved into this ancient, alien thing. I almost broke. I almost ran screaming from that cabin and never looked back. But in that abyss, I found my triumph. I didn't just observe it. I learned to commune with it, to direct its focus. I was no longer just a man. I was a conductor for an orchestra of memories. I was a parapsychomycologist, and the world, which had forgotten me, was about to need me very badly. 5 years after I left, I returned home. Not as a disgrace, but as a keynote speaker for a global neurosecurity summit. Strange psychic events, mass hallucinations, shared amnesia, contagious hysterias were cropping up in population centers. And they all correlated with outbreaks of a new aggressive fungal species, my ghost fungus. They didn't call me insane anymore. They called me a prophet. The family dinner was my father's idea, a reconciliation. But the air in their pristine suburban home was thick with a new kind of tension. Not pity, but fear. They looked at me like I was a bomb that might go off. "We saw you on the news, Eris," my mother said, forcing a smile. "So distinguished." My brother Mark just stared, unable to meet my eyes for more than a second. My father cleared his throat. We owe you an apology, son. We didn't understand." "No," I said, my voice quiet, calm. "You didn't." I looked at my father, his starched collar, his proud jaw, the certainty in his eyes now replaced with a deep, unsettling anxiety. "You told me I was a disgrace to the family name. Do you remember what that felt like, Dad? To say that to your own son?" He shifted. "Eris, Let me help you remember," I said softly, and I reached out. Not with my hand, but with my mind, through the silent, invisible network of spores that now travels with me, that dusts my clothes, that lives in my very breath. I didn't give him the memory. I gave him the feeling. My father's face went slack. His eyes widened, a film of sweat breaking out on his forehead. He felt it, the crushing weight of a life's work turning to ash, the cold dread of absolute betrayal, the suffocating loneliness of being utterly, completely alone against the world. He gasped, a dry, rattling sound, clutching his chest. Then I turned to my mother. "You cried for the son you thought you were losing." And I gave her a taste of the terror, the feeling of your own consciousness fraying at the edges, dissolving into something ancient and vast and utterly inhuman. She let out a small, choked scream, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wild with a horror she had never known. Finally, I looked at Mark. "You said I was chasing ghosts." I didn't have to do anything. He was already pale, trembling. He saw it in my eyes. He saw that I had not only found the ghosts, but I had brought them home with me. I stood up from the table. The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't the silence of judgment. It was the silence of pure, unadulterated terror. The silence of people who have just looked into the abyss and realized their brother, their son, lives there. They weren't looking at a disgrace anymore. They were looking at a warning. A man who had walked through a hell of their making and returned wearing its shadow like a crown. My victory wasn't in the fame or the vindication. It was in that moment of terrible, perfect clarity. In their eyes, I saw my truth reflected back at me, finally undeniable. I had survived, and in a world now haunted by what I had unearthed, I was the only one who knew how to speak the language of the ghosts.